welcome to December's episode. We hope you're all well and, have had some interesting deep dives with Scorpio season. I always think of Scorpio season as being like figuring out what's dead and dying and like communing with that sort of the themes of death. And we know it's a big part of that. And Sagittarius season, we're moving into burning it. Burning
Totally.
the dead things. It's exciting. And then obviously the tail end of December will be Capricorn, so that's interesting as well. So we're kind of in the thick of Sagittarius season, so I assume that's what we will discuss primarily. But and moving through and seeing what the astrology is, what Shadi's got in store for us astrologically, and yeah, looking forward to it. Our last one of 2024. Thank goodness. And yeah, let's see. How are you doing, Shadi, with your start or kickoff to Sag season?
Sag season. My it's interesting because I think for me, Sag season is it's an energy I really like would love to embody. And it's like a forever, like I'm like forever stuck in like Scorpio energy, I feel. And I'm like, so I have this thing about fanning over like Sag energy and then being like, I don't understand you. 'Cause here's the thing, like I felt Scorpio season was a little bit I felt like I was in my groove. I don't know. I mean, like global chaos aside and everything that's happening around us, I just felt like I was really in my element and we know why, obviously, because of my own personal placements and my connection to water energy
Mhm.
and also the fires of Scorpio because traditional ruler being Mars, I feel a connection to that energy. So so now I'm sort of bracing myself a little bit for some of the truths that Sagittarius season likes to bring. It's known to be a blunt, like the stereotype of it is it's a blunt sign. It tells it things like it is, and it's because it's always on a quest for truth. But one thing I can say about this Sag energy, this Sag season, is that it is a little bit different than perhaps last year's. We have a Mars retrograde happening on December 6th, and we are currently, actually, as we're recording today, Mercury station retrograde. So it's November 25th today, so we record ahead of time. So they'll be simultaneously happening during Sag season, and they're both in fire signs. So Mercury will be retrograde in Sagittarius, and Mars begins its retrograde in Leo. I don't know. I feel like because of these retrogrades and because of my own relationship to this sign, I'm going to be hit upside the head with a lot of truths,
Mhm.
around authenticity, like living an authentic life. That's very much Sagittarius, the quest for a truthful existence and having meaning in its life. And there's some like more deeper kind of connections to Sagittarius. So I'm curious to see what the tarot has to say about all this because I'm like, I'm walking trepidatiously through December, going, what are you gonna bring my way?
Yeah. um, yeah, same. I think there's something it's in a traditional Sag season, I would say probably is quite an exciting time for a lot of people, as much as it is got that real light shining on truth and things like that. In that there's an invitation for action. And so people who are a bit disconnected from the action part of themselves and are more into their like thinking and feeling sides or can can probably feel uncomfortable with that, which is what I feel. I think it is for me anyways. But one of the big cards, the main card to do with Sag season, which I guess we'll predominantly focus on for now, is temperance.
Mhm.
And that's another one in the deck where a lot of people feel have like a love hate or question mark relationship with temperance because um there's actually a real element of patience around it. And I think that, it's one of my favorite metaphors is the temperance card to do with after death, like and the leaves having been released from the trees and then, they're on the ground and a lot of people use fire to burn the leaves to create this um really rich fertilizer for their gardens. And you think of it like that, almost like a placeholder or like a liminal space where that new thing isn't growing. It's that winter sort of vibe in terms of like laying your gardens to rest, but you're nourishing the soil with it. And it's taking your experiences, taking your life, what you how you've moved through your life, taking your wisdom and your knowledge, even from things that aren't that we've now know we need to release. Like even the things that we've released from our lives, there's still lessons and things in there for us, and we don't just let all that go. It's like letting the negative thing go, but holding on to the bits that we learned from it, and that using that to nourish something new. So it's kind of a weird in between
Mm.
space that a lot of people feel really uncomfortable with. But and then there's also the Wheel of Fortune, which is another one, the
Yeah,
suspension one.
and
Yeah.
that was well, your wonderful Astro Tarot readings that are up for Sag season. I highly recommend everybody to check them out. And
Good.
that was the card for Cancer.
Yes, it was.
Yeah,
Because we both
and
have cancer placements, and I was like,
yeah, I was like, "Whoop." So, yeah, those readings were pretty on point. I really
oh,
appreciate.
good,
Yeah, it's
good.
very nice.
They felt it.
I was like, felt it. I was like, "Okay."
Mhm.
It really is nice to also get your journal prompts. That's a cool thing that you do.
Oh, thank you.
I don't necessarily do in my mine, but I love that. I love that because even if I'm not journaling, I'm still considering the
Yeah,
things
it's just
that
a way of
are on
thinking
my mind.
about it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
on my mind.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, everything. I mean, everything you said. I think there is, I actually know quite a few people with Sag moons. And, when I was doing the moon sign wellness course and really having to sit with all the different moon energies when I was putting it together, because it's like I know them, but I had to engage with them in a deeper way as well to create the
yeah,
course. But Sag moon for me was like, you know, um, again, it's a tough energy to access in ways of like that optimism and sense of expansion and
yeah,
hope has to be there for folks that have that moon. And I gather it's similar for those with rising signs and having a sun placement, but there's something about the moon that's like how your inner landscape kind of like stays harmonious. And
mhm,
which I think we can all learn from that, because there's this understanding of Sagittarius as being um like toxic positivity or like bypassing, and that is not what Sagittarius at its core really is about. And I just want to like side note here, and forgive me if I've already said this in another podcast episode, but so the ancient Zoroastrians, which is a religion of ancient Persia and also current day Afghanistan and Iran, it goes back like 3,000 years, and it's also rooted in sort of practices that were connected to the celestial bodies, the even ancients before the Zoroastrians. And they really, one of their big sort of tenets in the religion was to like joy was prioritized in a
mhm,
way that was like literally it was a way to ward off demons, what they called like negative energy or falsehoods. They saw God as higher consciousness and truth, and evil as lies. That's sort of how they understood. Yeah, very very
mhm,
like yeah, the New Age took a lot from Zoroastrianism.
mhm.
So I think it's very interesting because like you're not you're not dwelling in the place of like where Scorpio takes you and keeps you.
Yeah,
Uh,
mhm,
Sag is like, I love that for us. And I also love for us to pull out and try to find some hope, some optimism, because without faith and trust in what's unfolding, without taking action, as you said, without moving, because one of
yeah,
the things about Sag is also, we learn from we're okay with making mistakes. We're okay, very much like, let's just go forward. We're going to learn from the mistakes, a part of our experience. But we take a leap of faith. It reminds me of the fool in some ways, but it's like we take that leap of faith because we trust the path is unfolding. And not to say Scorpio season doesn't offer that for us, but
yeah,
I think that Sag, as you said, is like let's go forward.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So the card that comes to mind, if I was to like just to pull out two cards really quick that don't aren't necessarily related, would be like the Nine of Swords would be like Scorpio a wee bit, and the Nine of Cups would be Sag a wee bit, where it's like, but we must consider like be okay with considering worst case scenario and being okay sitting with grief and hardship and all that sort of stuff and great. Yeah, having being able to sit with that. But also the counter to that is that if you can imagine the worst, you have to be able to imagine the best. And like we're very comfortable with imagining the worst. We're very, a lot of us, very uncomfortable with imagining the best because it feels like wishful thinking. It feels like if you think it, then it's not going to happen. There's like a waiting for the shoe to drop. There's like, like if you let yourself believe in possibility and the most possible thing, it's going to be taken away. And there's so we almost protect ourselves not doing that, but we're very comfortable like letting ourselves imagine everything that could go wrong because if you imagine it all going wrong, then you've covered all your bases and you're prepared. But you know what I mean? But we're not prepared for
Mm-mm.
real potential possibility and joy of like everything working out and everything going well and what the best case scenario, a lot of us aren't for good reasons. And I'm not
Sure.
like not shitting on us for that because I do feel like the world is skewed that way. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? But to me, like Sag has a much more of a Nine of Cups vibe to it, where it's like, well, let's dream a little about what's possible and like consider possibility and our relationship to what's possible. And that's that beautiful temperance space holder where it's like the thing's been planted, but not even planted yet, but the soil's been tended to,
Mm.
and there's potential in this space. And how are we going to allow ourselves to embrace that potential, you know?
I love the 2 cards. Um, they really do speak to those energies really, really well. I think that this particular Sag season may feel like the toughest exercise in optimism and hope,
Mhm.
and I really feel like that is what these retrogrades are partly bringing for us. As you said, it feels like a culmination of years now because I feel that, yeah, the last 12 months have been intense for a lot of different reasons, we've talked about on this show and, like, globally and what's happening, and then, like but this journey began, like, in 2020 in many ways, and even 2019 if some folks wanna go back to that year, and I've talked about it not ending till 2026 fully. So next year is very transitionary. We've talked about this and likely will on the next episode
Yeah.
more, but it is really a shift because we have three outer planets changing signs, which is sorry, Pluto has already changed signs, but it's very recent, right? And then the other two, Neptune and Uranus, do change signs, even though they go back into their old signs in the same year in 2025, but it's still opening up a door because these
Mhm.
are slower moving planets. They're era defining, they are trajectory shifting. So when
Mhm.
the three of them are in a new sign, total like new backdrop for us
Mhm.
collectively and personally. And then we have Saturn and Jupiter changing signs. So there's a lot of shifts, and so we begin this year, this new calendar year for us with this calendar, the Western calendar. We definitely are entering it in this sort of self-reflective December with like the retrogrades, because I mean, um, Mercury ends its retrograde on the 15th on that new moon in Gemini, full moon in Gemini, but Mars continues until February. So, um, and then the nodes change as well next year. I forgot to mention that. Oh, I forgot to
Big,
mention that. That's so big in all
big
in my videos that
transition.
yeah, it's I that's big deal too when the nodes change. The dragon's head and dragon's tail, the north node, south node, they bring a new series of eclipses our way. They bring a new sort of story for us. So I
Mhm.
just wanted to say that this December, I feel like maybe this is a great moment to not necessarily take action, even though Sagittarius is very much
Wants to,
that,
yeah.
but it's more about like an internal action. So it's about reflexivity and also, yeah, like how are we cultivating optimism and hope for the new year, given, as you said, so many
Mhm.
reasons not to shit on ourselves because either you're contending with genocides and the sort of bigger horrific things, as well as like financial things that are happening, people's financial stressors. More and more of my clients are feeling like they're in their moment of austerity. I swear everyone's using that word. And like I want to say like it is a tough exercise in optimism and hope, but Sagittarius is like we got to do this. We have to
Yeah.
do this. So
Yeah, it's holding space for all of it, and all of it does include joy and beauty and sparky energy and ideas and all this kind of stuff. Like, I think, like many of us, because we are witnessing such horrible horrors, and we're experiencing on a personal level as well, so much stuff, that I think there's like a almost radicalness in experimenting with and considering our relationship to joy and positivity, and not, I don't mean
yeah,
bypassing way, but like in toxic ways, because we know those ones and they are not nice. They do not feel good. And so there's that, but our own personal relationship to what that could look like or mean for us. And what's cool about some of the other energies to do with Sagittarius is that, so there's Temperance, Wheel of Fortune is the other one, but Wheel of Fortune feels like it could be much more important for us in this season this year, because it's about keeping ourselves grounded and centered right in the middle of when things are going like woo, and staying centered in that wheel. And there's also an element with Wheel of Fortune of letting things unfold how they're going to unfold, and not having to know all
mm,
the answers and everything that's going to happen, and not having to see behind some veils. Some veils we're not meant to see, but we're seeing a lot behind a lot of veils. But there's some personal ones with our connection to our ancestors, spirits, well counsels, whoever, that we don't necessarily have to see all the working parts behind. You know what I mean? So it's how do we keep ourselves right in our day to day things that keep us grounded and connected to ourselves. And that feels like that could be a real support for us in this particular Sagittarius season. And but there's the elemental link of the Knight of Wands, which also has a link to the King of Swords, which is all about that truth that you were talking about, being a leader of our own truth. And it also has a numerological link to the Hierophant. So there's like a
mhm,
real sense of being like knowing what's best for you, like trusting yourself. There's a huge trust element in this season that we can tap into. And yes, being hit with truths is hard, but actually being the one having internal
yeah.
clarification and getting the truths internally is a whole different ball game, right? And that's the potential for this season as well. It could be quite a profound season for a lot of people, I think, if they stay in that middle ground, that Wheel of Fortune connected, that I think the bubbling up of truth for themselves and their own understanding of what's here for them now could be very interesting, I think.
I guess we're about to find out.
Gonna find out.
And what a wonderful way to then enter Capricorn season. When the sun enters Capricorn, on the 21st, I feel like if you are kind of having to think about some of these things, what a great way to sort of, cultivate that foundation, like to build your ambitions and like your goals, set your goals,
Mhm.
prioritizing. Like, I think that's great because Capricorn season, and it always falls into sort of end of December and then the new year. It's the solstice, so it feels like a new, like it feels like a marker, right? And that moment where you're like, okay, now how am I going to move forward? Um, and I love that if one has a chance to kind of take in some of the truths of this season, to really think about, well, we use these big words like authentic living and like truths. And I think the thing of really what it simplifies down to is like, are you living freely, like within like the capacity of who you are and how you are? Even when I think about recording this podcast, like my body immediately tenses up and I clench a little bit. But also there is that level of performativity where you're like, okay, I'm so hyper aware of like how I am right now. And I think what Sag is really saying is like, fuck all that.
Yeah.
Forget
Yeah.
it. Like,
With it. Go
cares?
with it.
Cares? Yeah, be done.
Yeah.
Like, exactly, be done with that stuff. It's so limiting because it really is about limiting beliefs. Like, how am I going to be perceived? And I see it with my kid. He's only 7, about to be 8, and I already see him so hyper conscious of how he appears to others. And as much as you can boost that in people, there's a tendency as human beings to kind of morph into that sort of, and especially those of us who are neurodiverse, we have a tendency to kind of struggle a little bit more with that, depending on what, the challenge is.
Yeah.
But it's like to take a deep breath and be like, this is kind of how I am. I might
Hmm.
be grumpy in the mornings. I may
Yes.
have perimenopause. I'm moody. I may blurt out some shit I don't mean.
Yeah.
Like it's okay. And you cultivate self-compassion and you honor your truth and know you're not perfect. What a great place to kind of set your goals from this place. You don't have to have answers. You don't have to fix anything. And I think that's what this December is about, especially with those
Yeah.
retrogrades. It's okay to not have the answers, but
No.
like, can you consider at least what isn't working and what is working? Can you consider how you want to be? Like,
Mhm.
it's funny because it's the whole New Year, New Me thing that
I
they
know.
in
Well,
the West, but I'm like, that's kind
but
of
it kind of goes, it does, because what's funny about Capricorn is it's the devil, right? So all about cycles of shame, which is great coming off of Sag with the big truths, but it's also the world card. So it is the completion of a cycle, it's cycle breaking stuff, it's changing trajectories. I can never say that word. And paths and finding paths and stuff like that. And but it's also the Queen of Pentacles. And it's just such a beautiful, like the energy to sort of finish and start a new year with. So it makes so much sense to me that Capricorn is sort of the that like completion starting
yeah.
threshold, right? And I think with Sag season this year, if we can, like you said, maybe relate to ourselves with a slightly more positive tilt, maybe rather like maybe we start talking to ourselves with a slightly more
Mm,
an energy of a bit more compassion, like you said, but also like possibility. And so it's like that kind of just shifting. If we notice that we're quite have quite a negative internal dialogue and quite a negative sort of um, way of relating to ourselves, how can we kind of shift a wee bit? Um, because if we can even just be open to noticing, like you said, what comes up, what are the truths that are bubbling up for us, what are we being made aware of, and then what Capricorn is saying is we're going to do this, we're going to deal with
yeah.
these truths, but we're going to look at what our shame cycles around them are and how are we going to combat that shame and that sort of like there's kind of like a trickster energy sometimes to Capricorn where it's like distractions and how are you distracted and how are you pulled away from yourself and pulled out of your body and pulled out of alignment, and what is it, what are those things for you, what are those little devils in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
um but yeah, I think that Sag season can bring that possibility up of what's true for us, something we need to be aware of, we want to work with, how we're relating to ourselves, and then we're going to move into, well, how are we going to relate to ourselves in a way that counteracts some of the maybe things, cycles and themes around shame.
Yeah. I
And
love
it
that.
is supported beautifully by some of the other cards. So yeah,
I love
fun.
that very much. Like I think that is the work when we talk about doing the work, like the healing work and using like the intuitive arts to kind of go a
Hmm.
little bit deeper. Like I find a lot of the folks I work with also have therapists and people they tend to be folks that also like to chat through things and through issues. And so I appreciate that that's not for everybody, but I definitely know that we delve we get to some places through using the intuitive arts in a way that some therapists actually, like my own actually does use like is open to the intuitive arts, like, so I think that's beautiful when that comes through
Yeah.
together because there's a way that it opens the door to talk about things that almost I feel like is a bit of a distance for someone like myself who can um, kind of talk my way around my stuff really well.
Yeah.
The Virgo rising, Mercury's
Yeah.
my thing, so I'm like, just bring
I
it. can
political, like, I'll tell you about myself.
yeah, totally. I'm like, so I can be my own biggest obstacle when it comes to healing some of my stuff because I can logic my way around things and talk my
Mm,
way around them. But when it comes to intuitive arts, it opens up a different part of you where you're talking about planets or you're using cards, but really you're getting to the core of some of those shadows that maybe talk therapy doesn't always allow for, but you have revelations and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to go. So many times my clients will go, I'm going to go talk to my therapist about this next week. But I didn't really acknowledge that. It's interesting, but we spent the whole time talking about like Saturn in their chart, you know? But
yes. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but, like, so but it's cool, right? Like, it's a tool like, the ancients used too. Obviously, they were more interested in more tangible things like money and knowing kinda what was gonna happen, you know, but still, I do think that when I think about, again, the Zoroastrians, their main goal was self-actualization, and their
Mhm,
religion encouraged self-actualization, and that was done through as well
mhm.
through um, the energies, the elements, the things like that.
Oh,
But sorry, not to ramble here, but I wanted to say two other key things about December because there's a couple aspects, planetary connections that are happening that are repetitions. The repetitions, and whenever we have repetitions of three or more in astrology, we really highlight them when it's within like 12 months, like when they're close together. And they're both very communication related. They're related to Mercury. And so again, it makes me kind of think that this December is really it's very much about how we think about things and how we talk about the things we think and our beliefs and how we communicate that to others and how we connect with others. So this is a big thing coming up. I find it interesting because it's during the time when a lot of people do meet with family or they gather with loved ones or friends or chosen family, at least here where I live. But so interestingly enough, this is an opportunity, so to speak, an exercise again in sort of maybe having faith in those relationships or how or holding on to the optimism and hope we were talking about in terms of like let me give the benefit of the doubt here.
benefit of doubt. Yes, I love that.
Let me see because people change and things change and Sagittarius is like we got to try again, we got to keep trying again and again and again. And so I just wanted to mention that we have Mercury opposite Jupiter, and this happened once last month, and it's happening twice this month. So once on the
Mm,
4th, just before Mars retrograde, and once on the 26th. And so much of this is about expanding again on our perspective, um, and um, and the push pull there, where we may feel a little stubborn about what we think, or we may feel stuck in what we think. This is Mercury will be retrograde for the first one in December, and it will not be retrograde on the 26th. So I think something during this duration of time, um, from Sag season transitioning to Capricorn, something will
mhm.
probably shift for us. Hopefully, if we're self-aware. So if we have any conflicts that
Yeah,
arise during this time, we may
yeah.
be able to.
And that's great again because Jupiter's linked to Wheel of Fortune, which is one of the cards in this season. So if that's like being highlighted, it feels from what you're sharing about this particular year, it feels like that is the key card for us in this season, that it's going to actually play a bigger role than like temperance is the theme, right? But we know that there's a trickiness, a bit more of a trickiness maybe to this season, and that Wheel of Fortune relying on our grounding, centering practices and checking in with ourselves. And like when you were talking there, it's like I can see Sagittarius being like believing the best in people and like, being optimistic, like you said, and like because that's who they are. Like, it's relating to people how not because of what not relating or being back to people the way they are to you, but being yourself with them because that's who you are as a person and not letting other people's stuff dictate how you respond. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's something about staying true to ourselves and being aligned with our values and being aligned. I mean, this is a great time of year to check in with your core values, which
Yeah,
can change throughout
ab-
your life, right? Depending what's happening.
absolutely.
Um, yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about temperance? Because like I always that card is amazing for me. I'm like, there's so much more to it than I think I give it credit.
is. Yeah, it really is the card of like potential, it feels like. And it's a really beautiful energy because it's kind of a there's a healing aspect to it after. So I the three cards for there's a three block of three, which is hanged being, death, and temperance. And those three, like there's just certain cards where you can't talk about one without talking about the other ones. Emperor's one. Um, and like the kings and queens are other ones, but I just think those three have a very bond, they're very bonded because it's a process. And so you start off the process with the hanged being, and the the metaphor for that is the leaves dying in the autumn. And it's processing something that you're being made aware of, that is you're finished with a completion of something. It's something's being, but you're suspended in it. So it has a tight energy sometimes because you don't feel like you have a lot of choice or a lot of like action happening. It's more like internal processing. And then death is the actual, when the leaf leaves the tree, it's away. And we all know that, well, many of us maybe don't know, because I actually didn't know this for a long time, that when a leaf leaves a tree, there's a little bud there already for next spring. So the trees are never like dead. Like the leaves aren't dead. The little bud's already there. So if you go out to look at the trees just now and the leaves are away, you'll see a teeny tiny little bud ready for spring. So it's
Oh,
that like real time metaphor of like, you can't, something you have to leave, something needs to go so something new can grow, right? Like it's that kind of feel. But it's temperance takes it even further. It's like, well, what are we how are we going to use those dead things that we
uh,
let go of, and what's left with us, and the wisdom that we gained from them, and the experience we had with them, and how are we going to create soil to grow something new in, soil to like plant a beautiful seed in. Like it's
yeah.
a holding space, but it's like full of potential. It's just chock full of potential. And that scares a lot of people, because people who are disconnected from their own potential, or that positive energy, more positive potential, and like visualizing, imagining, dreaming energy, can find that really, really challenging. And so they either love it or they don't love it.
I love it
Um,
so much because it kind of reminds me as well about what's going on. People like collectively, when you think about Pluto and Capricorn, sorry, Pluto and Aquarius,
yeah,
people saying things like, this is it, revolution, we're going to burn it all down. And again, I feel like it's very Scorpio and very like, in terms of like, sometimes things need to absolutely like die. But Sagittarius too is around the corner saying, as you said, but the temperance card, it just reminds me of this idea of like, well, like what, where the buds there? Like what's the
buds.
possibility? We need both, right? Because it's like sometimes things do need to, but sometimes things don't have to die and they can transform.
Um,
Whatever. But like Sagittarius is like, are we? And also as a mutable sign, it's flexible to considering a lot of things.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it does sometimes stay dogmatic and rigid in its truths, but like the quest, but very different than Scorpio energy, which is a fixed energy, which is incredibly rigid and sort of like really hyper fixating on what needs to go.
yeah.
But Sagittarius is like, all right, across the way is Gemini, and Gemini's like, I got to consider all the options, right? And that's that full moon in Gemini coming up this month. That's like, hey, I love this for us, Sagittarius, but, and I think that will be the full moon on the 12th, sorry, on the 15th. I keep saying the 12th, on the
Mm.
15th, where Mercury actually goes direct as well, where that full moon is like, okay, so I love that we're, focusing on this, what we need to be focusing on. Again, a lot of this is going to be around our mindset, mind frame, as you said, like, and, um, accessing hope and optimism in a way that it gives us some like possibilities, room for possibility. But then
Mhm.
Gemini's like, but have you considered all the options? Like,
Mhm.
is it gonna have to be I'm gonna end this friendship, or is it gonna have to be that like I'm done with my spouse? I bet you a lot of things are gonna pop up this December where people are gonna
Yeah.
make seriously definitive. This is my truth. I'm sticking to my truth, and I'm not giving anybody else any leeway. And I think that will be the mistake of this month. And that's really what my hope is for anyone listening, going, listen, it will
Yeah.
feel like that. It will feel
Yeah.
like that. Sagittarius is very direct, very much about what it needs. But, Gemini full moon halfway, midway this month is going to go, but did you
Yeah.
consider all the options? Because
Yeah.
it may not be a good decision for you to make, you know?
then, that link, then the Hierophant makes sense because unaligned, we know a Hierophant is very dogmatic and like this is the way, yeah, like stuck and very like you listen to me and that's all, and cult leaders and things like that.
Yeah.
But I want to just go a wee bit back what you were saying because I was like ping, ping, ping when you were talking about when we're looking at when we're zooming out and we're looking at more of a global collective thing and we're talking about everything needs to be burned down. Let's think about those little buds on the trees because actually one of the things that's coming through for me is it's not that it's what's already happened. There are so many people already doing amazing things. There are so many people who are change makers, who are who are have the answers, have suggestions and ideas and solutions, and they're actively working towards them. And so someone like me can feel very overwhelmed that like I'm meant to figure it out. That I'm doing my work. This is my work. I'm here to work with certain people, small groups, one-to-one thing. I'm a change maker in a small setting, and that I'm happy with that. There are people who are doing small, medium, large, huge, massive things that they just need a voice and they need support behind them. And it's like go out and find those people that something that's you're passionate about, something that you're worried about, something that you're interested in, and have a wee look about because I guarantee you those people already, those buds are already on the tree. Like they just need our backing. So it's not like we're having to figure out the entire new world and how it's going to look. It's already people have been doing this for decades,
Oh my
and
God.
they're there. We just need to
Yeah.
support them and try to get direct energy and time and money and support for them.
The microcosm version of that is our own lives too. We don't have to
Yes.
reinvent the wheel sometimes, or we don't need to like, there's ways, yeah. And I really think this month, if we can just exactly, if we can just kind of consider all the options or what's around
Yes.
us already, and like really like again, not make these huge decisions, these drastic decisions this December, I think that really sets us up for a beautiful momentum in Capricorn season, to like then assess things like with a I mean Mars will still be retrograde, but that's okay. Like it's this idea of like um we may have a little bit more clarity after this December, at least in terms of like how to move forward with certain things in our life, especially how we think about certain things in our life. And these changes can be massive. Like the energies can it can really be like that
Yep.
sometimes. It can really be
Mhm.
like that sometimes
We
where
can harness that. Like,
you
oh, I'm just thinking about so many things I have a relationship to that I've struggled with, that I would love my relationship to be around my certain thoughts around certain things, to be different. And it's like, oh, maybe this is maybe that can happen. Maybe I've done enough of the hanged being stuff.
yeah, no more hang
The processing and the changing that actually I can. It's
yeah,
like sometimes a flick of the switch seems like a flick of the switch, but actually it's been like a whole bunch of processing and stuff that maybe we're not
that's
even hugely conscious of, but it's like ding, ding, ding. It's that wheel of fortune. It's like happening behind the scenes. Like we're getting these pings and these knowings and like nudges and this, and it's like, woo, we got this for you. Just be available. Be available
exactly.
to something different.
And I
Mhm.
do really believe in like divine timing, man. I do. I really do. Part of me is like, as human beings, we just want to control everything, and I get that. I mean, at the core of it, we're just so terrified of loss and grief and death and all the things, of those sorts. And we want to do anything in our capacity to control. And
Mhm.
I get that. I get that, man. I really get that sincerely. But I think like, yeah, it's this idea of how do we even like contend with that truth and hold space for that while also like cultivating possibility and hope and saying, look, I know some of my behaviors and actions are rooted in fear, or
Mhm.
they're generationally passed down to me, or or whatever, or it's the reality of the times, like I'm, of what's going on in my own life or personal life or direct impact to people that I know or myself. Like, and I do think that there is those truths and still being able to say, okay, like when we lose hope, like I don't know what else is there. How can one live in a state of despair? I think that another aspect that's happening this month is Mercury square Saturn. It is going to do it 4 times this year, and it does so this December twice as well. Sometimes folks don't pay attention so much to Mercury place aspects, but it squares Saturn, and I do think it's important to think about squares are tensions that are external to us. They're less of an internal struggle. It's like the external weight of things. The Saturn brings the external weight, asking us to cultivate better boundaries, and the sign of Pisces asking us to have a cultivated practice of rituals of support for ourselves, like whether it is whatever that is, but like we got to be disciplined about it. We have to have some kind of structure around it. And how will that support our mind frame and how we think about things? Like we do need to cultivate containers of support for ourselves,
Yes.
to get through the times we're in,
Yeah.
because then it's a state of
Always meant
despair.
to do that. This was how we were meant to live, right? I think it's like a going back to those containers of support. I think we moved away from them, but like that was just the whole of existence of humanity was in containers of support. If you weren't in a tribe, a village, a unit, of whatever, you didn't survive. And
Yeah,
I think that's what we're being made reawakening to that
yeah.
need we need these pockets and these connections and communities and everything else. And how are we going to prepare ourselves for that so that we're well in those ones, that we're bringing our well selves into community with people and connections and being able to accept people for their whole humanity, because we're all weird, we all have our things. You know what I mean? And I think we need to move away from that sort of exactly what you were saying earlier, with the dogmatic sort of like I'm right, you're wrong, everything no, we're not doing that anymore. We're gonna, being connected to our own humanity so we can be open to other people's as well. And I think that when you're talking about Saturn, that's like the world card, the universe card. And so it is like cycle breaking. And I think there's potential in all of these placements, all these tarot cards. It's just potential there for how we're going to engage and what we're going to be invited into for something different and something better, whatever that better is, for each of us. And I think that's what our work brings to our own healing practices and our own healing journeys. And I think that's pretty cool.
This is a beautiful like way to kind of end the December podcast, to reflect on the things that you just mentioned. And yeah, and also Pluto and Aquarius, as you said, going back to community, going back to grassroots, going back to each other, but not in a dogmatic way, like in the ways that you said. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I guess we'll reconnect to record the January session in December, but I do want to wish everybody a blessed solstice. Who's listening right now to this podcast? I wish you a blessed solstice, and whatever it is you celebrate in December, wishing you all the best with this journey through the energies for December. Right there with you guys.
Yeah. And we'll give ourselves the gifts that we need in our own like sort of practices and our own connections with ourselves too. And that would be a really lovely thing to bring forward, I think, into our hermit year coming up.
That, gonna have to embrace that hermit energy. Here it
You
is.
are
It's
gonna
with
be,
me.
I think it's actually very, very helpful for what we were describing for 2025 and the type of year it's gonna be. So we'll talk more about it
Talk
next
more about
podcast. But
that.
yeah,
Yeah, next podcast for sure. And happy calendar new year for those of us with who follow this Western calendar. So we'll be talking to everybody in 2025.
yay.
And
Yes.
lots of love. Okay.
Lots of love. Take care. Bye.
Bye.